So before turning the presentation over to Lisa, I'd like to quickly review our learning objectives for this webinar. After completing today's webinar, you will be able to understand the CMA exam format and explain how the essay responses are graded. You will be able to recognize how to maximize your point earning potential on the CMA exam questions. Finally, you should know how to manage your time on essay portion of the exam. Now I'm going to turn your attention to Lisa Bowden to begin our presentation.
Thanks so much, Adam. So here's a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. I'll start with some background on why you should pursue the CMA designation, as well as some details about the exam's structure. I'm then going to cover some helpful tips for answering the essay questions on the CMA exam. After that, I'll hand it over to Sue, who's going to review some sample CMA exam essay questions, the responses, and the grading guidelines that are used to score candidates' essay responses. Sue will take you through 2 sample essay questions, and we'll discuss how you can maximize your point earning potential on this section of the CMA exam. At IMA, we understand that the essay portion of the exam creates a lot of anxiety for CMA candidates. Our goal today is to provide you with a better understanding of what to expect from the essay portion of the exam and how to respond to the questions so that you'll earn as many points as possible from the graders. We'll also explain how the essay responses are graded so that you'll understand what graders are looking for when they review your responses. We'll have time to answer some of your questions at the end of the webinar as well. So the CMA is a rigorous exam. It's also very relevant as it tests the critical skills and knowledge required of accounting and financial professionals who are working in business. IMA has conducted salary surveys for the entire world, for different regions of the world, and in all cases, professionals who hold the CMA designation are on average likely to earn quite a bit more in annual compensation than their non-certified peers. This is not just because you acquire new skills and knowledge, but I really believe that you also gain a lot of confidence in yourself, and that can help to boost your earning potential. The bottom line is that the CMA certification provides a positive return on your investment. It's definitely worth your while to become a CMA. So I see that we've arrived at our first poll question. I'm going to turn your attention to our moderator, Adam.
Thank you, Lisa. So attendees should see the first polling question now open on your screen. I'd like to remind everybody that you have about 30 seconds to respond to the polling questions today. You may begin responding as soon as you see it on your screen. And after selecting your answer, make sure you click the Submit button, which is located on the right side of the screen, just below the response options. So our first polling question, do you plan to sit for the CMA exam within the next 12 months? Yes or no? So Lisa, I am going to turn it back over to you so we can see how the audience has responded to that one.
Okay, well that should have been a pretty quick one to answer. So let's take a look at the answers. And yes, overwhelmingly, most of the people on the line are planning to sit within the next 12 months. So that's really great. What we're going to cover today is going to be very relevant and very important for you to be thinking about as you take the exam and sit for the answer the essay portion of the exam. So before sitting for any exam, it's really important to have a complete understanding of the exam's structure as well as its content. So first of all, on the structure side, this exam consists of 2 parts. Each part tests unique content, and the exam parts can be taken in any order. The exams are each 4 hours in length, starting with 100 multiple choice questions and concluding with 2 essay scenarios, which are sort of like mini cases. So let's look at the 2 parts. Part 1 is called Financial Reporting, Planning, Performance, and Control. It has 5 sections. The first one, External Financial Reporting Decisions, really focuses on financial accounting. Wants to see that you've got a good, solid foundation in financial accounting concepts. The next 3 sections, Planning, Budgeting, and Forecasting, Performance Measurement, and Cost Management, I really look at those as your core managerial and cost accounting sections. Planning, budgeting, and forecasting covers everything in the master budget process as well as forecasting techniques. Performance measurement, that covers all different concepts and approaches to answering the question, how is our organization performing? So that could be your variance analysis, your flexible budgeting, it could be balanced scorecards, ROI, and so on. And then cost management, That's looking at best practices in controlling and tracking costs, so like job order costing, process costing, activity-based costing. And then internal controls is focusing on the best practices in internal controls. The next part is financial decision making. This part has 6 sections. It starts with financial statement analysis, which is looking at, financial ratios, so your turnover, profitability, liquidity ratios, calculating them and also interpreting them. How are we trending over time? How do we compare to our competitors? Corporate finance covers best practices in corporate finance, like your risk and return models, your CAP-M model, and beta for risk, but also financial instruments. And then decision analysis. That, again, is a really at the core of your managerial accounting skills, and it's looking at variable and fixed costs, contribution margin income statements, what are we contributing after covering our variable costs, and relevant cost analysis gets in there as well. Risk management, that's best practices in enterprise risk management. So how, as an organization, do we identify risks early and then put plans in place to either reduce our risk exposure, transfer our risk, or maybe even avoid the risk completely. Investment decisions, that's your capital budgeting. So it's where you apply discounted cash flow methods like in a net present value approach or an IRR approach, payback and profitability indices and so on. And then finally, professional ethics. This is such an important topic to IMA and to our profession, and it draws on IMA's Statement of Ethical Professional Practice. And actually, you'll get a little bit of exposure to that later in the webinar when Sue covers one of the sample essay questions. So I just wanted to mention that, after you complete the 100 multiple choice questions on an exam, you'll proceed to the essay portion of the exam. And today's webinar is going to focus on that last portion of the exam, the essay questions. We're going to share some tips and insight with you so that you can maximize the number of points you earn on the essay portion of the exam. To get started, let's talk a bit about how the exam is structured and how it's scored. First of all, the weighting of the 2 exam parts is based on the relative amount of time spent on each part. So you'll be spending about 3 out of the 4 hours on the multiple choice questions, and as a result, about 75% of your exam score will come from the multiple choice section. Likewise, about 25% of your exam score will come from your performance on the essay section. When you complete the multiple choice section of the exam, the computer will be checking to see if you earned at least 50% on that first section of the exam. If you did earn at least 50%, then you'll proceed to the essay portion of the exam. You won't learn what your score in the multiple choice section was. You'll just know that you earned 50% or higher. If you haven't answered at least 50% of the multiple choice questions correctly, then the test will end at that time for you. Remember that once you leave the multiple choice section of the exam and advance to the essay section, you'll not be able to return to the multiple choice section again. And I see that we've arrived at our second poll question, so I'm going to turn your attention to our moderator again.
Thanks so much, Lisa. As you know, you may begin responding to the poll question immediately. I have about 30 seconds to respond to each question. So here's our second question today. Do you feel more anxious about the essay portion of the exam as compared to the multiple choice portion of the exam? Yes, I am more anxious. No, I'm more anxious about the multiple choice portion, or both the essay and the multiple choice parts make me equally anxious. After choosing the answer, please be sure to click the Submit button located below the response options so you may record your answer. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Lisa, and we can see where the anxiousness lies for our audience.
Thanks so much, Adam. So let's see. So a lot of anxiety around the essay portion of the exam, and then people also feel very nervous about both parts of the exam, and that's understandable. And our goal here today is to make you feel less anxious about the essay portion of the exam and more confident about completing it, because while you do, of course, have to study the content on your own to feel confident about your abilities, we're going to really help you to feel more comfortable in understanding what the graders are looking for so that you can really maximize your point earning potential on the essay portion of the exam. So let's remind everybody about the way in which the CMA exam is administered. This is a computer-based exam, and it's delivered at Prometric testing centers around the world. In order to schedule your exam date and time at Prometric, you'll first need to register with IMA to sit for a specific exam part. So for example, Part 1 or Part 2, as well as a specific testing window, such as September and October 2018, for example. Once you've paid your registration fee to IMA, you'll go to the Prometric website, locate a local testing center, then view the availability at the center during your testing window. And the exams can be taken during 3 testing windows each year, and those testing windows are January and February, May and June, and September and October. So those are the only months when you can go to the testing center to sit for the CMA exam. Now let's talk about exam strategy and what it takes to pass the CMA exam. Obviously, you need to have knowledge. That means that you're spending time reviewing and studying the content that will be tested on the CMA exam. You'll also want to try to remain confident throughout your preparation period, as well as during the exam itself. You want to try to remain positive and tell yourself that you can be successful on the exam. Negative thoughts will only hinder you. Keep in mind that the more prepared you are for the exam, the more confident you'll feel, and as a result, you'll feel less stressed when taking the exam. Another strategy that I recommend is to manage your time well during the exam. For example, you want to have a strategy that you use during the multiple choice section of the exam, which ensures that you're able to read through all of the 100 multiple choice questions. For the essay portion of the exam, there are also strategies that you can use to use your time as effectively and efficiently as possible. And finally, probably the most important thing a CMA candidate needs to have is a commitment. This is a very challenging exam. You'll need to commit yourself to studying and following through to reach your goal of becoming a CMA. Now, I'm here to tell you that you should not be afraid of the essay section of the exam. Everyone gets nervous when they're taking the exam, and the essay section seems to create more anxiety than the multiple choice section for a lot of CMA candidates. Keep in mind that the essay portion of the exam provides a great opportunity to earn partial credit. That means that you can earn points even if you don't get the answer to the question correct. That isn't possible on the multiple choice section of the exam. Now, in order to earn partial credit, you'll need to be sure to show your work as well as your assumptions. So for example, let's say that you're asked to calculate the break-even point in a problem, and you simply type in a number in the essay response box. If you made a mistake in your calculations and the grader can only see the number that you typed, then you won't earn any points for your response. However, if you type in your assumptions and your calculations, which will show how you arrived at a certain number, the grader may be able to award you a few points for the steps that you correctly completed. So it's really important to show your assumptions, calculations, and anything else that will help the grader to understand how you arrived at your response. Now, there are 2 essay scenarios or problems on the CMA exam, and each of them will have between 3 and 6 questions associated with them. So you could have anywhere from 6 to 12 questions to answer within the 1-hour time frame allotted to the essay portion of the exam. I recommend that when you start the essay portion of the exam, you take a look at each of the 2 essay scenarios to see what type of topics they cover. You'll also want to look at the questions associated with each scenario to determine which ones require simple responses and which ones will require more time. Doing an initial assessment like this will help you to manage your time on the essay portion of the exam. So now I've got a few tips for your essay responses. First, you want to pay very close attention to what you're being asked to do. For example, if a question is asking you to compare or contrast something, then you don't want to simply provide a definition. Make sure that you answer the question that is being asked. Be sure to read the question in its entirety so that you understand everything that you're being asked to do. Keep in mind that you may be a bit nervous, so you want to be careful that you stay focused and read through the requirements very carefully. I know when I've been nervous, sometimes I read through a question and I'm misreading it. Maybe I'm skipping, a really important word, and I misinterpret the question. So be sure to slow down and to, really read through the questions thoroughly. Candidates will be awarded points for writing skills on each of the 2 essay scenarios in each part. You'll need to ensure that the response you provide is relevant, to the question that is being asked. Specifically, graders are looking to see that candidates are using standard English. That means proper grammar, punctuation, and spelling, and that the thoughts are well organized and that they're communicated in a clear manner. When responding to the essay questions, it's okay to be brief and to the point. While some people prefer to type their responses in full sentences and paragraphs, it's also perfectly acceptable to include some bullet points in your responses. Now, keep in mind that the text box doesn't really allow you to put in true bullet points like you're used to using in a word processing system. So you would just use like the dash or the hyphen or the minus sign to, make your bullet points in the text box. I recommend that you try to answer every single question that's presented to you. If you're running short on time, then at least try to type in a few key points or create an outline of your response. Again, this is an example of how you can try to earn partial credit for your response. You may not be able to answer all of it, but you can at least pick up a few points here and there. Remember, when the exam graders are reviewing your response, they're trying to give points to you. They're not trying to take them away from you. Try to respond to the question with as much relevant detail as possible so that you make it easy for the grader to award points to you. Sue will give you some good examples on how this is done in a few minutes. So before I hand it over to Sue to show you some actual essay questions and responses, I'd like to explain how you'll input your responses in the essay portion of the exam. At Prometric, you'll have access to a simple text box on the screen where you type in your responses to each question. Keep in mind that the text box does not have as much functionality as Microsoft Word, sort of like I was mentioning with the bullet points. It has pretty basic word processing functionality. You'll have about 1 hour to complete the essay portion of the exam, and you'll probably need all of that time to answer each question thoroughly. If you finish and find that you have a few minutes remaining, then use that time to review your responses or add more details. Finally, here's a sample screenshot of what you'll see during the essay portion of the exam. On the left side of the screen, you can see which question number this represents in the essay portion of the exam. The amount of time remaining for the exam is in the upper right-hand corner. In this example, the problem is explained in 2 paragraphs in the middle of the screen, and then the box for your response is in the lower right-hand side of the screen. So you would type your response into that box, save it, and then advance to the next question within the essay section. So now I'm going to hand things over to Sue, who will take you through some sample essay questions and responses.
Thank you, Lisa, for your tips on answering the essay questions. At this time, I would like to integrate those tips while reviewing 2 sample essays. The first essay we will review is a qualitative essay focused on an ethical conflict. There are 3 questions to our first sample essay. Before we begin looking at the questions, though, let's quickly review or skim the scenario. The scenario is where you will gather the relevant data necessary to answer the questions. I encourage CMA candidates to approach essay questions in this order. Skim the scenario, review the question requirements, and then reread the scenario, noting the information that is relevant to the questions being asked. There will often be information that is not necessary. I call these distractors. At first glance, the information may appear that is relevant to the question, but they are in fact unnecessary. Let's read the scenario now. Alex Romanov is a management accountant at Carroll Mining and Manufacturing Company, and we'll refer to Carroll as CMMC going forward. They are a large processor of ores and minerals. While working late one night to complete the footnotes for the financial statements, Romanov was looking for a file in his supervisor's office and noticed a report regarding procedures for disposing of plant waste. According to the handwritten notes on the face of the report, CMMC had been using a residential landfill in a nearby township to dump toxic coal cleaning fluid waste over a considerable period of time. The report stated that locating a new dump site was urgent because the current one was nearing capacity. Romanov realized that it was possible CMMC had been improperly disposing of highly toxic fluids in a landfill that was restricted to residential refuse. Besides the obvious hazards to the residents of the area, there could be legal problems if and when the authorities were notified. The financial consequences of cleanup actions, as well as the loss of CMMC's generally good environmental reputation, could be catastrophic for the company. Romanov asked his supervisor how this item was to be included in the footnotes and inquired whether an accrual for cleanup costs was anticipated. His supervisor told him to, quote, forget about this matter, and that he had no intention of mentioning one word about the waste disposal in this year's financial statements. The next section of our first sample essay is the questions. Remember that there are typically 3 to 6 questions per scenario or per essay. We will review these questions and provide sample responses on the next few slides. As I read the questions, I will emphasize the words that we need to focus on when providing our response. Question 1 states, using the categories outlined in IMA Standards of Ethical Professional Practice, identify the standards that are specifically relevant to Alex Romanov's ethical conflict and explain why the standards are applicable to the situation. Question 2, according to the IMA Standards of Ethical Professional Practice, what further steps, if any, should Romanov take in resolving his ethical dilemma? And question 3 says, if he continues to be rebuffed by his employer, should Romanov notify the appropriate authorities? Should he anonymously release the information to the local newspaper? And explain your answers. We have arrived at our third poll question, so I'm going to turn your attention to our moderator, Adam.
Thanks, Sue. Attendees may respond to the polling question immediately as I read through the question. After selecting your answer, please remember to click the Submit button so your answer is recorded. Here's our third polling question. What are the 4 standards of ethical professional practice that IMA members are expected to comply with and uphold? Confidentiality, integrity, professionalism, and transparency. Or option B is competence, confidentiality, integrity, and credibility. Or C, competence, confidentiality, integrity, and communication. Please be sure that you to select the appropriate response. I'm going to turn it back over to Sue so we can see how our audience has responded today.
Let's take a look at the results of our third poll question. It looks like most of you have chosen B. The correct answer is, in fact, B, so I commend you for having a good understanding of where the ethical professional practice for IMA members stand. If you, however, did choose a different answer, please don't feel like you're at a loss for where to find this information. IMAnet.org, is a great location to find the Statement of Professional Practice for IMA members. So when you're getting ready to sit for the exam, I highly suggest that you spend a considerable amount of time with the ethics portion and be very comfortable with this information. Let's go back to our sample essay. At the top of this slide, we note question 1 for your reference, with our sample response to question 1 immediately following. So once again, question 1 states, using the categories outlined in IMA Standards of Ethical Professional Practice, identify the standards that are specifically relevant to Alex Romanov's ethical conflict and explain why the standards are applicable to the situation. When we begin reviewing our sample response, note that we have reiterated the question. Also, by offering the response in a neat format, essay graders will have the opportunity to see the response quickly. However, remember that ability to show effects like bold and underline are not available in the word processing tool at Prometrics. Here is our sample response. The standards from IMA's Statement of Ethical Professional Practice that specifically relate to Alex Romanov and the situation at Carroll Mining and Manufacturing are the following: competence, confidentiality, integrity, and credibility. Under competence, we could write, perform professional duties in accordance with relevant laws, regulations, and technical standards. It appears that CMMC is not in compliance with the relevant laws and regulations regarding the dumping of toxic materials. At a minimum, Romanov has an obligation to report the situation to higher authorities in the company. Confidentiality. We are required to keep information confidential except when disclosure is authorized or legally required. This standard may or may not relate to CMMC situation, depending on the requirements of the environmental regulations in effect in the jurisdiction where CMMC is operating. Romanov may be required by law to disclose the information. Finishing up our response to question 1, we now expand upon integrity and credibility. We will continue using the approach as we did with confidence and confidentiality, which is to state the standard, define the standard, and then explain why the standards are applicable to the situation. By following this approach, we are given the essay graders the greatest opportunity to give us as many points as possible. Another point worth mentioning is that although we want to be sure to offer all relevant data, we also want to remain clear and concise. Here is the remaining answer or remaining response to our sample essay. Under integrity, we need to refrain from engaging in any conduct that would prejudice carrying out duties ethically. Abstain from engaging in or supporting any activity that might discredit the profession. If Romanov does not report the apparent illegal dumping to those in authority at CMMC, his behavior would not be considered ethical under these standards, and his lack of action would discredit the profession. Under credibility, communicate information fairly and objectively. Provide all relevant information that could reasonably be expected to influence an intended user's understanding of the reports, analyses, and recommendations. Report any delays or deficiencies in information, timeliness, processing, or internal controls in conformance with organization policy and or applicable law. All of these standards make it clear that Romanov has an obligation to act objectively in this matter and report the situation to those in authority at CMMC. Now let's move on to question 2. Question 2 states, according to the IMA Standards of Ethical Professional Practice, what further steps, if any, should Romanov take in resolving his ethical dilemma? Here's our sample response.
So initially, Romanov should follow CMMC's policy regarding the resolution of an ethical conflict. If there is no policy or the policy does not resolve the issue, he should consider the courses of action recommended in IMA's Statement of Ethical Professional Practice. Since Romanov's immediate supervisor appears to be involved in the dumping situation, he should submit the issue to the next higher level. If the situation is not satisfactorily resolved, Romanov should approach successive levels of authority, for example, the CFO, the Audit Committee, or the Board of Directors. He can also contact an IMA ethics counselor or other impartial advisor to discuss possible courses of action. Romanov should consult an attorney regarding his legal obligations and rights in this ethical conflict. On the next slide, we'll conclude with a sample response to question 3. Question 3 states, if he continues to be rebuffed by his employer, should Romanov notify the appropriate authorities? Should he anonymously release the information to the local newspaper? Explain your answers. So when we go through the sample response for question 3, please note that the entire requirement is not fulfilled until we explain our answers. Here's our sample response. It's not considered appropriate for Romanov to inform authorities or individuals not employed or engaged by CMMC unless he believes there is a clear violation of the law. In discussions with his attorney, Romanov should clarify his obligations under the law. If CMMC does not take action after Romanov has informed the appropriate in-house authorities, he may be obligated to inform the regulatory agency involved. He should not, under any circumstances, anonymously release this information to the local newspaper. Before moving on to the sample grading guide, this is a great time to mention that some essays will be testing your knowledge of IMA's ethics, as well as another topics such as budgeting or financial reporting. The essay we just covered does, however, focus exclusively on ethics. This is a sample grading guide, also known as a scoring rubric, and it's used by the essay graders to provide points to candidates for their essay submissions. The columns of this grading guide show the item description, the maximum points by question, and finally the candidate's total score on the essay. There are a total of 4 points for question number 1, 2 points for question number 2, and 2 points for question number 3. Therefore, the total number of points available for this essay scenario is 8 points. It's also important to note that the exam candidates do not know how many points each essay is worth while taking the exam. Every essay is weighted differently. By mentioning the 4 standards of competence, confidentiality, integrity, and credibility, the CMA candidate will receive the full 4 points available under question number 1. For question number 2, the items that need to be mentioned are described as follow company policy, follow IMA statement on ethics, and explain steps to take if issues need to be escalated. Both points for question 3 will be received by notifying authorities if laws are broken, notify regulatory agency, and not sending anonymous communication to the media. Now that we have walked through a qualitative example and its scoring rubric, let's look at another essay example that is more quantitative. The second essay we'll be walking through will include mathematical calculations. However, our approach to answering the essay remains the same. Let's review my suggested steps. 1, skim the scenario. 2, review the questions. 3, reread the scenario, noting the information that is relevant to answering the questions. And 4, thoroughly yet concisely answer the questions. So let's look at the scenario now. The City of Blackstone owns and operates a community swimming pool. The pool is open each year for 90 days during the summer months of June, July, and August. A daily admission is charged to patrons of the pool. By law, 10% of all recreational and sporting fees must be remitted to a state tourism promotion fund. The city manager has set a goal that pool admission revenue, after subtracting the state fee and variable costs, must be sufficient to cover the fixed costs. Variable costs are assumed to be 15% of gross revenue. Fixed costs for the 3-month period total $33,000. The following budget for the pool has been prepared for the current year. You can see, they have an assumption for the number of adult admissions, the number of student admissions. You see there's a different fee for each of them. Then there's a state tourism fee, which is 10% of revenue. Then you've got your variable costs and the fixed costs of $33,000. So the city manager is trying to determine what admission mix is necessary to break even and what actions could be taken to eliminate the expected deficit.
So in the second sample essay, there are going to be 4 questions. But the 4th question, we can see that there are an additional 4 sub-questions, A through D, that we need to make sure that we're answering. In order to ensure that we do not omit any specific information, we can set up an outline of the questions when we begin answering the essay. So in the word processing feature at Prometric, you should start by numbering the text box 1 through 4 with subparts A, B, C, and D for number 4. Let's take a closer look at the questions now. Given the anticipated mix of adult and student admissions, how many total admissions must the pool have in order to break even for the season? Regardless of the admission mix for number 2, what is the highest number of admissions that would be necessary to break even for the season? Regardless of the admission mix, what is the lowest number of admissions that would be necessary to break even for the season? And question number 4 is asking us a little bit more of a qualitative type of answer. It's asking or stating the city manager is considering several pricing strategies that could increase the admission fees at the swimming pool. Define each of the pricing strategies listed below and discuss how each could help to eliminate the expected deficit. The different choices for A, B, C, and D are product mix pricing, volume discount pricing, penetration pricing, and off-peak pricing. We will approach this question in the same manner as we did with the questions in sample essay number 1. To begin, I would like to clarify that we are not suggesting that you rewrite the question before you show your solution. We've done so for this presentation simply to make sure that we are clear on what the question is asking. Let's look at the question in more detail. Given the anticipated mix of adult and student admissions, how many total admissions must the pool have in order to break even for the season? Before we are able to answer this question, we must be clear as to what is being asked. In this essay, there are two components that we need to consider. One, the question is asking for a number of admissions that are required to break even. Two, the second component is there are two types of services, adult and student admissions. Therefore, there is a mixed component to keep in mind. The first step is to calculate the contribution margin percentage in total. Contribution margin is calculated by taking revenue less all variable costs. In this example, the variable costs are both the 10% state tourism fee of $4,050 and the stated variable cost of $6,075. Therefore, contribution margin is $30,375. To calculate contribution margin percentage, we divide contribution margin by total revenues. The contribution margin is 75%. We apply this contribution margin percentage to the admission price of an adult and then to the admission price of a student. Therefore, contribution margin of adult admissions is $5 times the 75% contribution margin, which is going to give us $3.75 per adult. The contribution margin for student admissions is $2.50, $2.50 times the 75% contribution margin, and therefore it's going to be $1.87.50 per student. Now let's look at the mixed component. We know the mix of adults to students because we were given the budget, which is the anticipated mix. Taking the proportion of the anticipated adult admissions to the student admissions will allow us to weight the contribution margin. Since 30 of the 150 total admissions are anticipated to be adult admissions, and 120 of the 150 are anticipated to be student admissions, we have a weighting of 20% adults and 80% students. The next step is to calculate the weighted average contribution margin. By applying the 20% for adults to the $3.75 and 80% for the students to the 1.875, we calculated a weighted average contribution margin of $2.25. The final step in determining break-even is to determine the fixed cost and dividing that by the weighted average contribution margin of $2.25. When we divide the fixed cost of $33,000 by the weighted average contribution margin of $2.25, we arrive at a break-even point of 14,667 admissions per season. For our final polling question, we would like you to answer question 2 of sample essay number 2. After the polling results are tallied, I will go through the correct calculations for the question. I'm going to turn your attention to our moderator, Adam.
Thanks so much, Sue. As with our previous questions, you may respond immediately while I read through the question and the response options. Our fourth and final poll question today is, regardless of the admissions mix, what is the highest number of admissions that would be necessary to break even for the season? Please choose from the following options and click the Submit button. 17,600 admissions per season, 8,800 admissions per season, 14,667 admissions per season. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Sue so we can cover to see what the correct answer is.
Let's take a look at the results for our final poll question. The majority of you have chosen 14,667 admissions per season. Unfortunately, that is not our correct answer. The correct answer was actually A, and let's go through how we actually go through and calculate that now. Question 2 of our second essay is asking a more straightforward question by omitting the mixed component that we saw with question 1. Question 2 states, regardless of the admission mix, what is the highest number of admissions that would be necessary to break even for the season? For this question, we only need to cover the fixed cost of $33,000 with the lower of the two contribution margins. In this case, the contribution margin for the students is only $1.87.5 per student versus the adult contribution margin of $3.75 per student or per adult. Therefore, the maximum number of admissions is 17,600 per season, and that would have been the correct answer for our full question. So don't be upset or don't be nervous if you've not gotten the correct answer. It just means that this is an area that you need to spend a little bit more time studying. Moving on to question 3, we are now being asked a similar question that we saw with question 2. The question states, regardless of the admission mix, what is the lowest number of admissions that would be necessary to break even for the season? Now we are looking at the number of admissions that correspond with the highest contribution margin, which is the adult contribution margin of $3.75. Dividing the fixed cost by 33,000 or of 33,000 by $3.75, the minimum number of admissions required to break even would be 8,800 per season. The final question in essay number 2 is question 4. Remember that there are 4 sub-questions to this question. Let's go through the question again. The city manager is considering several pricing strategies that could increase the admission fees at the swimming pool. Define each of the pricing strategies listed below and discuss how each could help to eliminate the expected deficit. A is product mix pricing, B is volume discount pricing, C is penetration pricing, and D is off-peak pricing. When we begin answering this question, you may be inclined to start calculating prices for each of these strategies. This is one of the times you want to simply answer the question in order to complete the essays in a timely manner. You would not receive extra points if you did calculate the prices. Our sample response for 4A. Under product mix pricing, the price is set low for some products or segments in the hope that it will attract others. If it is found that the adults are usually accompanied by students, attempts could be made to find a mix of adult-student prices that brings in the most patrons. Sample responses for 4B through 4D will be answered on the next slide. Volume discount pricing could be used by allowing for discounts based on an individual patron's usage, for example, a season pass, or allowing for group discounts for clubs or church groups. 4C is talking about penetration pricing. Penetration pricing is setting of a competitive price in the hopes of beating the competition. Price could be set competitive or lower than other pools in the region in an attempt to maximize contribution margin. And then finally, 4D, off-peak pricing. Off-peak pricing is used to encourage purchases during slower periods. A discounted pricing could be set on days when volume is expected to be low, for example, cloudy days, or during slower times of the day, for example, like an evening admission. We will be reviewing a partial grading guide or grading rubric for questions 1 and 2 of the sample essay, scenario number 2 on the next slide. Since this essay is more quantitative in nature, the points will be awarded according to certain calculations that are shown by the candidates. Remember, as Lisa mentioned earlier, be sure to show all of your work. This will allow the essay graders the opportunity to give you partial credit for correct formulas, even though your final answer may be incorrect. So as we look at the sample grading guide, under question number 1, points will be received for calculating the contribution margin percentage, calculating the contribution margin in dollars for the adult admission as well as the student admission, determining the correct weighting of the admissions, determining the weighted average contribution margin in total, showing that fixed costs need to be covered to break even, and then dividing the fixed cost by the weighted average contribution margin. And then lastly, for question number 1, showing the correct answer of 14,667 admissions will earn you a point as well. For question number 2, credit will be received by showing the contribution margin for the students instead of the adults, and then showing that the fixed costs need to be covered to break even again, and then lastly, the final answer of 17,667 600 admissions. In conclusion, I hope you found this information and these techniques helpful on how to approach the essays on the CMA exam. Remember, this is your time to shine. Show the essay graders that you indeed have a mastery of the CMA exam topics and can apply your knowledge of management accounting. Best of luck to you on the CMA exam. And now I'm going to turn your attention to our moderator, Adam, so that we can answer some of the audience's questions.
Thanks so much, Lisa and Sue. I'd like to begin addressing some of the questions from our audience members today. First, let me remind participants to send your questions and comments by typing them into the Q&A panel on the left side of your screen. Let's start off with just a simple question. What types of calculators are allowed while taking the CMA exam?
Yeah, Adam, this is Lisa. So I saw that question was being asked, as well as some other foundational questions about the exam and the examination process. So I wanted to let everybody know that there's a really good resource available to you on the IMA website. If you go to imanet.org and then you click on CMA certification and then getting started. If you scroll down to the gray box, there is a hyperlink in there that says CMA Handbook, and that is where you're going to find a lot of really good information about the whole CMA exam process, including the calculator policy. At the bottom of the bottom of page 19 and going into page 20 is information about the calculators that are allowed. You can either bring, so here are the options. You can either bring in a small battery or solar powered electronic calculator, and it has to be one that's limited to 6 functions, a maximum of 6 functions: addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, square root, and percentage. So just like your basic, calculator that you get from any kind of store, really. It can't be programmable, can't use any type of tape, and it cannot be one that requires a plug, okay? Just a portable calculator. Now, alternatively, you can also use a financial calculator, but there are specific models that are allowed, and only these specific models are allowed. So I do encourage you to take a look at the top of page 20 in the CMA Candidate Handbook, and I'll tell you right now, though, the models are Texas Instruments BA2 Plus, or the Hewlett-Packard 12C, or the Hewlett-Packard 12C Platinum. And an older model of the Hewlett-Packard, it's a 10B2, is valid, but that one's no longer being sold. But if you have that older model, that's fine. But those are the only models that you can use, either that really simple 6-function calculator or the Texas Instruments BA2 Plus, the Hewlett-Packard 12C, Hewlett-Packard 12C Platinum, or the older Hewlett-Packard 10B2. So please take a look at the CMA Candidate Handbook for information, to read up on all of that, as well as a lot of other helpful tips.
Thanks so much, Lisa. So how far in advance should someone register to take exam part?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Now, if you're planning out your studies, you might as well start to plan out when you're going to be taking that exam. I know for me, when I was sitting for the CMA exam, I figured out when I was going to sit, and then I worked backwards, to figure out my study plan. So right now it's, late August, and of course the September-October testing window is opening up soon, and you could be, registering for that if you feel that you're ready for that now. I know that you can already purchase an exam ticket from IMA for both the January-February 2019 testing window as well as the May-June 2019 testing window. However, I don't think you can schedule it prometric for those windows yet. You can schedule for September and October, but you can't schedule yet for 2019. So in general, I would tell somebody that, maybe 6 to 8 weeks out, you can usually schedule about even 12 weeks out. You could be looking a few months out to pick your testing date. But I think that if you do 6 to 8 weeks, you should be in pretty good shape. Now, it might be a little bit more difficult if you're looking at the end of a testing window. So let's say that you want to go that very last week of October, the very end of the CMA exam testing window. It might start to get filled up quicker because believe it or not, a lot of people like to procrastinate and put it off to the end of the testing window. So this is a supply and demand thing. It might vary based on the region too. I know in certain parts of the world there aren't as many testing centers available, so you want to try to schedule your exam earlier. I also tell people if you have a specific date that you have to go, you can only go on, say, the 15th of September, or you have to go on a Saturday or a certain day of the week, then you want to schedule out earlier, right? Because you want to, make sure that you can get the date and the time that you want. But generally, I would say 6 to 8 weeks should be sufficient. But if you're looking at that very last week in the testing window, those do tend to book up. So, don't procrastinate. Try to pick a date, fairly early and stick with it. But I think that 6 to 8 weeks should be sufficient.
So speaking of planning ahead and scheduling, your test in advance, what are some study tips? Especially if people are having trouble carving out enough time each day to study. Do you have any tips? Maybe both of you could kind of give some input on this one.
Yeah, so first of all, it is really important to put a study plan in place, okay? This is a rigorous exam. It requires a lot of your time. And for people who are, really busy juggling, work commitments as well as, demands on your time from your personal life, family, friends, hobbies, other things that you're involved with, it's really important that you put together a schedule. And maybe you even have to plan it into your week, that you take up, Saturday mornings you study for 3-4 hours, Sunday mornings or something, Sunday evenings, whatever it is. But I would tell you to try to put together a regular schedule, and I do recommend that you use some dedicated CMA exam prep materials so that you're really focusing on the content that's on the CMA exam and that you're working through some sample questions that are provided by those materials. Now, Sue, she became a CMA much more recently than I did, so I think, Sue, I know you've got some great ideas, too, on what people should do to prepare and study.
Lisa, I appreciate that. I think one of the things that was important for me is just emphasizing to my friends, family, how important this credential was to me, and it was going to be my life for a few months. And I think them knowing that I was so dedicated, they supported me throughout. And so I think just gaining the support of friends, family, from your work, knowing that this is something that's going to make you better, I think that's important. And I know when I finished, my kids and my family were extremely proud of me. And so it just shows them, to be dedicated and to, unfortunately we miss out on some things occasionally, but looking back, it's totally worthwhile. And just that feeling of accomplishment. So gain the support and then, celebrate when you're done, because once you do it, you've got it. So you do have to earn it, though.
I did want to mention, just going back to the question about scheduling out, a very helpful listener just said that she was able to register with Prometric for January 2019. So that must have just opened up, because I know that we had somebody looking at it last week. So if you're a planner and you're ready to start, putting a date out there for January 2019, it sounds like the Prometric site has opened up for that. So just wanted to mention that.
So will the students be allowed to have a pencil and paper in the exam room?
Yeah, so a lot of that information is also covered in the CMA Candidate Handbook. Once you check in with Prometric, they will give you pencils, so they're like #2 pencils, so they're not going to let you use your own. They will provide them, and they'll also provide you with scrap paper. So you'll receive a packet of 10 pieces of scrap paper, so you've got front and back, which makes 20 sides for you. It'll be stapled. It will not be lined, and it could be pastel colored. It might not be white, but it will be, paper that you can use as scrap paper. And I always tell people, try to be very neat with your scrap paper. So when you're doing a calculation for, let's say, question number 1, you label it number 1, maybe box it so that you can come back and look at your notes if you decide that you want to review that question. But you will be provided with paper and pencil. You will not be able to bring your own, but you will bring your own calculator, and you want to make sure that it's one of the required, one of the allowed calculators, that is.
All right, I think we are out of time, so I want to pass it back over to our host, Margaret.
Thank you, Adam.
At this time, I'd like to thank our presenters, Lisa Bowden and Sue Mullen, for sharing their knowledge and expertise with us. We're very appreciative that they've made time for IMA and for our audience today. And also, thank you, Adam Larson, for moderating today's event. As a last step, please be sure to complete the event evaluation survey, which should be visible on your screen. If it has not popped open, please click the resources icon at the bottom of your screen for access. I would like to thank Lime for sponsoring today's webinar and thank all of you for your participation in today's event, your commitment to IMA, and your professional development through IMA's CMA Candidate Webinar Series. I look forward to spending time with you again soon when we'll enjoy some more valuable and interesting information through the IMA webinars.